"We need fresh blood and lower salaries," Allison said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "You're too senior for our budget. Pack up today." I sat there in the sterile conference room at Eastridge Medical Logistics, watching my new manager deliver what felt like a death sentence to my career. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her perfectly manicured nails as she tapped them against the mahogany table. 22 years of dedication, of late nights and weekend emergencies, of being the person everyone called when things went wrong, reduced to a budget line item. My name is Teresa Dalton, and at 59 years old, I had just been told I was too expensive to keep around. The irony wasn't lost on me. For over 2 decades, I had been the steady heartbeat of this company's operations department here in Phoenix, Arizona. I was the one who trained half the staff, the one who navigated 5 different leadership changes, the one who kept the wheels turning when crisis after crisis threatened to derail our medical supply operations. But Allison Brandt, fresh out of her MBA program with her crisp blazers and color-coded spreadsheets, saw me as nothing more than an outdated expense. She had been with us for exactly 3 months, long enough to scrutinize payroll, but not long enough to understand that some things couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. "I completely understand the business decision," I said, forcing a smile that I hoped looked genuine. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Allison blinked, clearly surprised by my calm response. She had probably expected tears, maybe even begging. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed down my navy cardigan, and gathered the few personal items I kept in the conference room. My favorite pen, a small succulent that had somehow thrived under the artificial lights. "I'll have my desk cleared by the end of the day," I continued, my voice steady. "I assume human resources will handle the paperwork?" She nodded, still looking bewildered by my composure. "Yes, of course. Teresa, I want you to know this isn't personal. It's just business," I finished for her. "I understand completely." As I walked out of that conference room, I felt something shift inside me. Not defeat. Something else entirely. Something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Because what Allison didn't know, what she couldn't have known despite all her spreadsheets and analysis, was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. The writing had been on the wall since the day she arrived, questioning every process, every procedure, every person who had been there longer than her morning latte. I had seen this coming from miles away. Walking back to my desk felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything looked familiar but somehow different. The operations floor buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the steady hum of people managing the intricate dance of medical supply logistics that kept hospitals across 3 states running smoothly. Jennifer Martinez looked up from her computer as I passed, her dark eyes immediately concerned. She had been one of my first hires 8 years ago, straight out of college with a degree in supply chain management and more enthusiasm than experience. Now she managed our largest accounts with the kind of precision I had taught her. "Teresa, how did the meeting go?" she asked, though something in my expression must have already given her the answer. I paused at her desk, choosing my words carefully. The last thing I wanted was to create panic or badmouth the company that had been my professional home for over 2 decades. "I'll be leaving Eastridge," I said simply. "Today, actually." The color drained from Jennifer's face. "What? But why? You're the backbone of this place." Before I could respond, David Chen from the inventory management team appeared at my shoulder. Word traveled fast in our tight-knit department. "Is it true? Are you really leaving?" Soon, a small crowd had gathered around my desk. These were people I had hired, trained, mentored through their careers. I had attended their weddings, celebrated their promotions, helped them navigate difficult clients and impossible deadlines. They weren't just colleagues, they were family. "It's a business decision," I explained, echoing Allison's words while carefully packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box. My desk had accumulated quite a collection over the years. Photos of my nephew's graduation, a small cactus garden that had somehow flourished under my care, awards for customer service excellence, thank you cards from grateful clients. Michael Torres, who managed our pharmaceutical logistics, shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. You know more about medical supply chains than anyone in the industry. Who's going to handle the Morrison account, or deal with the regulatory compliance updates? That was the question, wasn't it? I had built so many of our processes from the ground up, developed relationships with suppliers and clients that took years to cultivate. My institutional knowledge was vast and, until today, I had assumed it was valued. You'll all figure it out, I said. Though privately I wondered how Allison planned to replace 22 years of experience with fresh blood and lower salaries. You're all incredibly capable. As I sealed the box with tape, I caught sight of Allison watching from her office window. She had that look managers get when they're second-guessing a major decision, but are too proud to admit it. For just a moment I felt sorry for her. She had no idea what she was about to lose, what kind of chaos was heading her way. But that sympathy faded quickly. This was her choice, her strategy. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like the longest 2 minutes of my life. 22 years of memories flashed through my mind. My first day when the company occupied just 2 floors of this building. The late nights during the healthcare crisis 3 years ago, when we worked around the clock to ensure critical supplies reached hospitals. The celebrations when we landed major contracts that everyone said were impossible to win. I had given this company the best years of my career, and now I was leaving with nothing but a cardboard box and a severance package that would barely cover 3 months of expenses. But as I loaded the box into my silver Honda Civic, I couldn't help but smile. Because what Allison didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I hadn't spent the last year sitting idle, waiting for the axe to fall. 6 months ago, I had been approached by former colleagues who had left Eastridge to start their own medical logistics company in Denver. Innovacare Solutions was small, but growing rapidly, and they needed someone with deep industry experience to help them scale their operations. They had been persistent in their courtship, offering me consulting work that I had been doing quietly on weekends and evenings. The founders, Patricia Wong and James Rodriguez, were brilliant minds who understood that in medical logistics, relationships and experience mattered more than cost-cutting and fresh blood. They had been waiting patiently for me to be ready to make the jump, and just last week they had closed a significant funding round that would allow them to offer me something Eastridge never could. A true partnership in building something revolutionary. My phone buzzed as I sat in my car in the parking garage. A text from Patricia. How did it go? Are you ready to change the industry? I typed back quickly, let's do this. Within an hour of leaving Eastridge for the last time, I was on a video call with Patricia and James, officially accepting their offer to become Chief Operating Officer of Innovacare Solutions. The title alone was worth more than the salary Allison had deemed too expensive, but more importantly, I would have equity in a company that valued innovation over budget cuts. That evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the employment contract that would change my life, I thought about Allison's confident proclamation about fresh blood and lower salaries. She believed that experience was just overhead, that institutional knowledge was replaceable with enthusiasm and lower paychecks. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The industry was smaller than most people realized. Word traveled fast when someone with my reputation made a move. By tomorrow morning, the news would start spreading through the networks I had spent decades building. And once the official announcement hit the trade publications next week, everyone would know that Teresa Dalton wasn't retiring or fading away. I was just getting started. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity that felt more energizing than any vacation I had taken in years. While Allison was presumably congratulating herself on cutting costs, I was busy building something that would shake the foundations of our industry. My first week at Innovacare Solutions felt like coming home to a family I hadn't known I was missing. The Denver headquarters buzzed with the kind of energy that only exists in companies where every person believes they're changing the world. Patricia and James had assembled a team of brilliant minds who were tired of the bureaucracy and stagnation that plagued larger firms. "Teresa, we need your opinion on the Morrison contract approach," Patricia said during my second day, sliding a proposal across the conference table. Morrison Medical was one of the largest hospital networks in the Southwest, and, coincidentally, one of Eastridge's most profitable accounts. I studied the proposal, recognizing immediately that Patricia had done her homework. This wasn't just about undercutting prices. It was about offering a level of service and innovation that established companies like Eastridge simply couldn't match with their bloated overhead and outdated systems. "This is good," I said, making notes in the margins. But Morrison's purchasing manager, Helen Foster, values personal relationships above everything else. I've worked with her for 12 years. She's been frustrated with Eastridge's slow response times lately. James leaned forward, interested. What would it take to get a meeting? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, a database of relationships built over 2 decades that was worth more than any salary Allison could have paid me. "Give me an hour." By the end of that hour, I had secured a meeting with Helen for the following week. Not only that, but 2 other major accounts had agreed to preliminary discussions after hearing I had joined InnovaCare. Word was already spreading through the industry network that something interesting was happening in Denver. Meanwhile, back in Phoenix, things weren't going quite as smoothly as Allison had anticipated. Jennifer had called me 3 times with questions about processes that weren't documented anywhere but in my head. The pharmaceutical compliance audit that I usually handled was approaching, and nobody seemed to know where to start. "Teresa, I hate to bother you," Jennifer said during our latest call, "but the FDA inspector is coming next week, and Allison is asking about the Henderson Protocol. I've never heard of it." The Henderson Protocol was something I had developed 5 years ago after a near disaster with temperature-sensitive medications. It wasn't written down anywhere because it was more of an approach than a rigid procedure, the kind of institutional knowledge that took years to develop and couldn't be replaced by fresh blood and enthusiasm. "It's not in any manual," I explained patiently. "It's about reading the inspector's priorities and adjusting your presentation accordingly. Tell Allison she might want to postpone the audit until she has a better handle on compliance procedures." What I didn't mention was that postponing an FDA audit was incredibly difficult and made companies look incompetent. But that wasn't my problem anymore. The irony of these calls wasn't lost on me. Allison had eliminated my position to save money, but now she was essentially getting free consulting from me because I cared too much about the people I had left behind to let them fail. That consideration was about to end. On Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after my departure, I received a call that would change everything. Helen Foster from Morrison Medical was on the line, and she sounded frustrated. "Teresa, I'm glad I caught you," she said. "We've been having some serious issues with our Eastridge account. Response times are terrible, and their new manager seems to have no idea how our operation works. I heard through the grapevine that you've moved to a different company. Are you taking new clients?" I looked across the InnovaCare office, where Patricia was presenting our newest service innovations to a team of eager analysts. The future was happening right here, right now. "Helen," I said, "I think we should definitely meet." The Morrison Medical meeting exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Helen Foster sat across from Patricia, James, and me in their corporate conference room, reviewing our service proposal with the kind of attention that made it clear this wasn't just a courtesy meeting. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," Helen said, tapping the section about real-time inventory tracking. "Eastridge promised us this capability 3 years ago, but they never delivered. How quickly could you implement?" Patricia exchanged a glance with me before answering. "With Teresa leading the implementation, we could have the basic system running within 60 days, full optimization within 90. Helen's eyes lit up. "That's impressive. What about regulatory compliance? That's been our biggest headache lately." This was where my decades of experience became truly valuable. Helen, you know I've been handling Morrison's compliance needs for over 8 years. I know every detail of your operation, every potential pain point. We're not just offering compliance management. We're offering peace of mind. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering everything from pricing structures to implementation timelines. By the end, Helen was ready to move forward with a pilot program that would transition Morrison's entire Southwest region to InnovateCare within 6 months. As we shook hands in the parking lot, Helen pulled me aside. Teresa, I have to ask, how did Eastridge let you go? You're the best in the business. Sometimes companies make decisions they don't fully understand, I replied diplomatically. But their loss is InnovateCare's gain. Walking back to our rental car, Patricia was practically glowing. That was incredible. 1 meeting, and we just landed our biggest client ever. This is just the beginning, I said, checking my phone for messages. 3 more former Eastridge clients had requested meetings after hearing about my move. The industry grapevine was working exactly as I had expected. Back in Phoenix, the ripple effects were becoming impossible to ignore. David Chen had called that morning to tell me that Jennifer had submitted her resignation. Michael Torres was interviewing with competitors. Even worse for Allison, the FDA audit had been a disaster, resulting in a formal warning that would require months of remediation work. She's panicking, David told me during our call. Allison keeps asking if you left any documentation about procedures you developed. I told her you probably took all your knowledge with you. The truth was, I hadn't taken anything that belonged to Eastridge. But the knowledge in my head, the relationships I had built, the instincts I had developed, those weren't company property. Those were mine, earned through years of dedication and expertise. That afternoon, James gathered the InnovateCare team for our weekly strategy meeting. The energy in the room was electric as we reviewed our expanding client pipeline and discussed hiring plans to handle our rapid growth. Thanks to Teresa's industry connections, James announced, we're looking at a 300% revenue increase over the next quarter. We're going to need to expand the team significantly. As the meeting continued, I couldn't help but think about Allison's confidence, that fresh blood and lower salaries were the key to success. She had been so focused on cutting costs that she had forgotten the fundamental truth of the service industry. Relationships and expertise were irreplaceable. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was from Robert Kim, one of Eastridge's biggest pharmaceutical clients. Heard you made a move. Interested in discussing our account. When can we talk? I showed the message to Patricia, who grinned widely. Should I start drafting another contract? Better make it 2, I said, scrolling through 3 more similar messages that had just arrived. This is going to be a busy week. By the end of my 3rd week at InnovateCare, the transformation was complete, not just for me, but for the entire competitive landscape of medical logistics in the Southwest. What had started as Allison's cost-cutting measure had turned into an industry-wide shift that nobody could have predicted. The official press release went out on a Tuesday morning. Fast-rising medical startup announces veteran COO Teresa Dalton launches aggressive talent acquisition initiative. Patricia had worked with a public relations firm to ensure the announcement reached every major trade publication and industry newsletter simultaneously. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, my LinkedIn profile had been viewed over 1,000 times. Former colleagues, clients, and competitors reached out with congratulations, questions, and thinly veiled inquiries about job opportunities. The medical logistics community was small and interconnected, and news like this traveled fast. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. Jennifer called me just after lunch, her voice excited in a way I hadn't heard since her early days at Eastridge. Teresa, you're not going to believe this, she said. Allison just came out of an emergency meeting with the executive team. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. What happened? Morrison Medical sent a formal termination notice this morning. Helen Foster specifically mentioned that they were moving to a company with more experienced leadership. Then Robert Kim from FarmCorp called, and requested an immediate review of their contract terms. 2 other major clients have scheduled meetings with the executives next week. The domino effect was exactly what I had anticipated, but even I was surprised by how quickly it was happening. When companies lose their most experienced personnel, especially in relationship-driven industries, the impact isn't always immediate. But medical logistics was different. Trust and reliability were everything, and clients had no patience for learning curves when people's health was at stake. "How's Allison handling it?" I asked, though I could already guess the answer. "She's been in her office all afternoon making phone calls. Word is she's trying to hire back some of the people who left after you did, but they're not interested. David got an offer from one of your former clients to start their own in-house logistics team. Michael's already accepted a position with MedTech Solutions." The talent exodus was accelerating, just as I had known it would. Allison had underestimated the loyalty and respect I had earned over the years. When experienced professionals saw how the company treated someone with my track record, they started questioning their own futures there. That evening, Patricia, James, and I celebrated at an upscale restaurant in downtown Denver. The reservation was ostensibly to discuss our expansion plans, but it felt more like a victory party. "To Teresa," Patricia raised her glass of wine, "for showing us that experience and expertise aren't just line items on a budget, they're the foundation of everything we do." As we clinked glasses, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 3 weeks. A month ago, I had been seen as an expensive liability, someone whose years of knowledge and hard-earned expertise were viewed as obstacles to efficiency rather than assets to be valued. Now I was a partner in one of the fastest-growing companies in my industry, with equity that would secure my financial future and the respect that I had always deserved. My phone buzzed with another message from a former Eastridge client. Then another. The pipeline of opportunities just kept growing. "You know," I said to Patricia and James, "I think we're going to need a bigger office." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. The momentum we had built was only going to accelerate, and Allison's decision to eliminate my position was going to keep paying dividends for years to come. The phone call came on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 month after Allison had told me I was too senior for the budget. I was reviewing quarterly projections in my new corner office at InnovaCare when my assistant announced that someone from Eastridge was on the line. "Teresa Dalton speaking," I answered, already knowing what this call would be about. "Teresa, this is Robert Harrison, Executive Vice President at Eastridge." His voice carried the weight of desperation masked as professional courtesy. "I was hoping we could discuss your departure and perhaps explore options for collaboration." Robert had been with Eastridge for 15 years, long enough to understand the value of institutional knowledge, but not senior enough to have prevented Allison's cost-cutting crusade. Now he was tasked with cleaning up the mess. "Of course, Robert. What can I help you with?" "We've been experiencing some challenges since your departure," he said carefully. "Several of our major clients have expressed concerns about service continuity. Morrison Medical has already terminated their contract, and FarmCorp is threatening to follow suit unless we can address their compliance concerns." I let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing the full weight of Eastridge's situation to settle between us. Through my office window, I could see Patricia presenting our latest client acquisition numbers to the board of directors. We had signed 4 new major accounts in the past 3 weeks, 3 of them former Eastridge clients. "I'm sorry to hear about those challenges," I said finally. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We'd like to offer you a consulting contract," Robert continued. "Something that would allow you to help us transition your former accounts, and perhaps provide guidance on regulatory compliance procedures." The irony was breathtaking. A month ago, my knowledge and experience had been too expensive to keep on payroll. Now, they wanted to pay consultant rates for the same expertise they had dismissed as unnecessary overhead. "Robert, I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite busy with my new role as Chief Operating Officer at InnovaCare Solutions. We're in the middle of a significant expansion phase." The pause on his end told me he was processing the implications. My title at InnovaCare was higher than anything I had ever held at Eastridge, and consultant rates for someone at my level would cost them far more than my original salary had. Would you consider a part-time arrangement? He asked. We could work around your schedule? I'm afraid that's not possible, I replied. However, I wish you the best in finding solutions to your challenges. After hanging up, I couldn't help but smile. The desperation in Robert's voice had been unmistakable. 2 days later, the final blow landed with surgical precision. Patricia knocked on my office door with a grin that could have powered the entire building. Teresa, you need to see this, she said, placing a printed email on my desk. The message was from Helen Foster at Morrison Medical, but it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to our entire industry network, copied to dozens of medical logistics professionals, suppliers, and decision-makers across the Southwest. To whom it may concern, the email began. Morrison Medical would like to formally recommend InnovaCare Solutions and Chief Operating Officer Teresa Dalton for any organization seeking exceptional medical logistics services. After years of declining service quality and unresponsive management from our previous provider, InnovaCare has restored our confidence in third-party logistics partnerships. 19. The email went on to detail specific improvements in response times, compliance management, and cost efficiency that we had achieved in just 4 weeks of service. But the final paragraph was the most devastating part for Eastridge. We particularly want to highlight the difference that experienced leadership makes in this industry. When companies value fresh blood over proven expertise, they do a disservice to their clients and ultimately to patient care. We are grateful to have found a partner that understands the critical importance of knowledge, relationships, and reliability in medical logistics. The email had been sent to over 200 industry professionals, including several Eastridge clients who were now questioning their own service agreements. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from potential clients who had seen Helen's endorsement. By the end of the day, we had scheduled preliminary meetings with 6 new prospects, including 2 of Eastridge's largest remaining accounts. You realize what this means? Patricia asked, as we reviewed the latest inquiries. It means Allison's strategy of cutting costs by eliminating experience just cost them their reputation, I replied. The revenge was complete, and I hadn't had to lift a finger. The industry had done it for me. As I sat in my Denver office that evening, watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me here. Allison's decision to eliminate my position had felt like the end of something precious, but it had actually been the beginning of something extraordinary. Not just a new job, but a new understanding of my own worth, and the irreplaceable value of hard-earned expertise in a world obsessed with cost-cutting and quick fixes.